What's up folks, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we'll talk about the Dracotail deck with branded cards. And of course you can already see this is an updated list. We had some new results on the weekend at the German Open and some of the regionals that were going on right before YCS Pittsburgh, which if I'm not mistaken is this weekend in the US. So we're going to see some changes in the Dracotail lists, and I played at the German Open with a list very similar to the one I showed off in the prior video, where the only thing that I changed was really the side deck. The main deck stayed exactly the same. For example, I played Dragon's Mind, which at least in round 4 won me the matchup against Malice. That was quite cool. And I started off really well, playing 4-0 in the first 4 rounds, and then I tapered off drastically. Round 9, I was at a standing of 5-3, and interestingly, I had a mirror match against former Master Duel World Champion Emre, which was super cool. Huge shout out, nice guy. And we talked about the deck afterwards because we had a mirror match and we played a pretty similar build, I think, at the end of the day. But he already knew the list that people were playing that actually performed really well with Dracotail branded in the event, that we talked about afterwards, and that is playing some of the new branded cards. And you can already see it here with the Dragon that devours the Dogma, and also he told me to play the quick play spell because it has some great interactions, which people ask me in the comment sections of the prior deck profile, like, would you play this card, right? We have the new support, should I play this in Dracotail branded? And I was like, in pure branded, yes, 100%. Those new cards are amazing, right? The quick play spell, the new fusion, they do really well. But I said in Dracotail branded I would not play them, and I was wrong. This stuff is the goo. We will talk about it. I already took this deck to locals now with an updated list to the locals on Tuesday, which is at the time of the recording of this video, was yesterday. And it was just a few changes in the main. I changed the side deck more, but that was less relevant, to be honest. At least to my locals experience, right? And I went 4-0 undefeated again, so now I took Dracotail branded 4 times locals with slightly varying lists. This one being the most, more drastic change that I've done so far. But before I yap along any longer, let's get right into the list. For the main deck, as pretty much always with Dracotail, we're aiming for 40 cards clean, which is what we're playing. And the Dracotail engine hasn't really changed a lot whatsoever compared to my last list. We're still playing 3 Famana, 3 Malulu, and 3 Lucias. These are the Dracotail names that get us to fusion summoning right away, right? Famana fuses, Malulu fuses, Lucia searches usually Famana if we don't have access to her. Then we're playing the 1 Frixel for the bridge between Dracotail and Branded, or Branded and Dracotail, let's say it like that. And then these ratios have changed a little bit. We're playing double Pan, but also now double Urgula. And before this was 3 Pan, 2 Urgula, and I've talked about this in my prior video that this could be a point of change in the list. And I have to say, it really depends on the matchup, which card is better to see to fuse with 5 mana on the turn 0, but both of them have really good board breaking capabilities, right? And you can force cards that your opponents usually want to hold for a later point, or of course during the end phase. I think especially post-siding, Urgula is very strong because people try to side in floodgates like Different Dimension Ground, which is a card that hurts this deck a lot, right? Or cards like Caught By that they said, the Fallen The Virtous, right? Those cards you will find in those meta matchups where if you can snipe them with the Urgula, that really does a lot. But the same thing, if you can out a monster with the Pan, that is really powerful, right? So especially if you can take away an endboard beast that would annoy you, drawing either of those, or ideally both of those, or even Malulu in combination with one of those 2 and 5 mana is super correct, right? That is very, very powerful. We're still playing the triple of both of the spells. Of course, these are again our ways to get to fusion summoning, and we're still playing 1 of each of the traps. I think these shouldn't change whatsoever. I've seen some people in the brand list playing 2 traps only, which then was Flame and Sting, or sometimes even Horn, and they would cite the 3rd trap for going first, but I think they're just too powerful. Game 1, if I want to win the dice roll, I always want to see 3. Even sometimes going second, I keep the 3 traps in if I know it's going to be a grind game, right? Because then we need those 3 traps for recursion, especially if our opponent can stop a grind game using Ash and Bell on the 2nd trap, right? That would hurt us a lot. Especially since we're not on the King of the Swamp package, which would allow us to play the Blue Eyes Tyrant, which then could recall our traps. But we're not doing that, so that's a little bit tougher. And then we're playing, of course, still the branded package. And for the monsters, it's just Albos in the main deck. That is already enough. We cut the Cartesia down to play a little bit more non-engine, and then 2 branded fusion. And the new inclusion is triple Fallen The Virtous. I was not a big fan of this first, but this card is cracked in this deck. I love this. This has so many great applications, be it board breaking. You can force cards or out cards like the Herald, for example, which can really annoy us. You can, of course, hit floodgates, permaspells, permatraps. If you go first, you just set this, your opponent plays. You hit a field spell, right? Whatever they need to play. This becomes super strong. It's a really nice card. And I've been really happy to include this. And you can also use it to dodge targeting negates, right? Like, for example, Impro Marvela on Athalion can be very impactful. If you go first, you chain the Fallen The Virtous to out your own monster to dodge that targeting negate. All of a sudden you can play and you get some graveyard setup, which is really strong. And I'll show you something about that after going through the deck list. Then we're playing more hand traps, or hand traps at all, right? Which is triple Fuva, triple Ash, triple Nibiru, and then to round it off with 40, we have 2 more slots, and that is double Droll. And Droll was a card that I was really missing at the German Open in my main deck, where I haven't played this there. I had it in the side, and there's too many matchups. Of course, against Dracotail, it doesn't do a whole lot, but against a lot of other matchups, it is really powerful. And I really miss this card, so it's a good inclusion. We're playing this in the main instead of Bell, and Bell you will see in the side deck though, so don't worry about that. That's the main deck already, 40 cards clean. The Cartesia is out, so we're playing that instead. And yeah, I like this. This was very good for me, and again, we'll go over this card in just a bit. Let's get into the extra deck, because this has changed quite a bit as well. For the extra deck, we'll start with the Dracotail fusions, and that is triple Athalion and 1 Guillermo, and as before, 1 Guillermo is always enough. The second never really comes up. 3 Athalion is more important. If I could, I would play 4 or 5. This card is really the bread and butter of this deck, simply because it has so much recursion, right? That is super powerful. Then for our regular, I would say Dracotail fusions or Dragon fusions, we're playing the Secretarian. Again, don't rely on this as a floodgate against Dracotail branded or even branded. I think the value is way overblown, because you can still fuse, right? You just can't activate your Athalion or your Guillermo right away, but then you'll just fuse away a Pan, a Malulu, just pop this or negate this. Or if they already have Athalion, you go second, you're like, alright, let's super poly their Athalion, their Guillermo away, and go into Secretarian. I had this happen in round 3, where I played against a Dracotail branded player in the mirror match, and he used super poly every duel, right? I won against him 2-1. And he always used my board away into Secretariat, and it didn't do anything for him. Now people will play the quick play spell as well, so they just pop it right away, right? I don't think it's very good for that. It's good to extend your own plays though, right? So I still think you should play this, but regularly, I don't think it's very good in the mirror match as a floodgate. I think that value is overblown, but its play potential is very important to go for OTKs, to extend your plays. You should still play this card, right? It's not a reason to cut it, but don't value it too much as a floodgate. Then we're still playing Filio Regis, one of the best cards in the extra deck for sure. The banishment effect, super cute. The new edition, the first new edition is the Chaos Star Source Dragon. And I learned the value of this, especially in the mirror match against Emra, who took my board apart really nicely by bridging from Branded into this card and then popping my back row when I couldn't respond to it, right? So that was very impactful, very good. And that's a good thing to learn, I would say. Then for all the Branded fusions, we're playing 1 Sanctifier, 1 Mirror Jade, 1 Albion the Branded Dragon, 1 Lebellion, and you see all those are still exactly the same as before, and then of course also still 1 Titanic Lad. Now the 2 new additions, you already saw it at the beginning, are the Dragon that Devours the Dogma and also Rimbrum, and all of those 2 come up, and I think they're good additions, especially since we're playing the quick play spell now. They have quite a lot of impact. And card number 15 is still SP, always still comes up, very powerful. Never cut it, right? Cute style, I like it. The 3 cards that we cut were the Mysterion Dragon, the Cross Sheep, and the Typhon. And I have to say that, especially Mysterion and Typhon, during those 3 locals and the 10 rounds at the German Open basically never came up. I think I summoned Typhon like once in those, was it now 17 rounds? So if you have other good extra deck targets, just get away with it, right? We're not in a Varietal format. Maybe I think you can get away without playing it. Then the Mysterion, which I think in theory sounds really good, but its effect just barely came up for me. I summoned it like twice or 3 times, so it's not as impactful as some of the new editions can, at least in theory, be, right? And the last card to cut for me was the Cross Sheep, which I think this is the saddest card to cut, because in theory, I showed you the combo in the last video where you just slap it on top of your Athalion and Lucius and leave it as an end board piece, right? To summon back a Frixel or Lucius or Malulu, Cartesia, whatever, right on your opponent's turn, where this provides a lot of value, but it's also volatile if you need to rely on it resolving, which I had the situation at the Open where this card lost me a game because I built my board in such a way where I relied on it too much, and as a result, I couldn't resolve it because they popped it before or negated, I don't exactly remember, and all of a sudden I couldn't play with it, and all my ways to fuse were gone. So it's still a cute card, you just have to be aware that you should always have a plan B to still fuse, even if this card leaves the field, right? Even if this card doesn't resolve. So that's quite important, I think, for this deck, because you want to fuse on your opponent's turn. It's the best thing your deck can do. So yeah, that's the extra deck. Now let's get into the side deck quickly. For the side, we put in 1 new card, which is the Triple Parolia. I learned that this card has more matchups than I was expecting. I checked the top cut representation before my latest event, and I was deciding, yeah, in the top cut at least, Phantasma has a bigger spread amongst matchups, where Phantasma came up against like 64-65% of decks at the time when I checked, and Parulia came up against like 50%. What I didn't include, of course, in my way of thinking, in my line of thought, is that you're not just going to play against the top card decks, right? These are just in top card, and yeah, this would have come up quite a bit at the German Open, and it's very good against a lot of rogue decks. So at my locals, for example, Parulia is very good. So that's the reason why I think you should include it. Also, if you have Meowls, Malus is back in the format. People really enjoyed that at the German Open, and I think at some other regionals, and played that a bunch. If you can include Meows, it's getting a reprint now in the 5D structure decks, just like the other 3 Charmies. Try to pick up a playset, it's really good, right? I'll still do that as well when that thing comes out on Thursday. We're still playing 3 Ghost Ball, super good in the mirror match, good against a lot of other decks, but we just want the draw to shut down those pile decks especially. And then we're playing now back in 3 Veiler. I played this in the Magistus variant, which I still have to show off, but in this variant I cut it, but now I had a lot of matchups where those hand traps like Ash, Fuvo, they weren't enough, and for example against the Man of the Mark, I often would have preferred Veiler over Fuvo in my hand. So that's quite funny that it's not as bad as people make it out to be, because yes, against Dracotail it doesn't do a whole lot usually, right? Against Yami it doesn't do a whole lot, against Mitsu it doesn't do a whole lot, but there's a lot of rogue matchups still where Veiler all of a sudden becomes, just like Imperm, a very good hand trap. We're then still playing the Joel number 3. Of course it had to be there, but it's in the side simply because we're lacking some space. We're playing 3 Bystials, Magnamut, Saronir, and the Drewsworm. If you were to cut one of those, Drewsworm would be the card. Of course, Magnum would move from the main deck into the side deck, but it's good against a lot of matchups. And the last 2 cards are for going first, and that is 1 Cartesia. Also move to the side deck for a going first card, and then also 1 Caught by the Grave. And as you can see, there's a bunch of cards which I talked about very highly missing from the main deck. One of those is the Fenrir, which wasn't as impactful as it was before at the Open, and I still think you could potentially play this as a going first card, though I think you would need to card Cartesia and Caught by the Grave there. The approach that we took now in the main deck is we play a little bit more non-engine and board breaking capabilities with the quick play spell, and thus we need more consistency cards for going first and Cartesia and Cold Bite both provide this, right? Cold Bite allows us to push our plays through. For example, if we get hand trapped, and Cartesia provides an additional way to fuse, right? So that's very important. Though I still think, especially depending on your locals, you might still want to play Fenrir instead, right? It's a very good card, especially in the Yummy matchup. As I said, I never played against Yummy there. And people at my locals are bored of Yummy, so that's quite a thing as well. That ultimately also means that Phantasme is less impactful, though it is very good against Mela still, right? Way better than Porelia, for example. So it's really a clash, though you could cut down, for example, on Bestials, just play the Magnemute and Saronir, cut down the Druisworm, Cartesia and Cold Bite, and play Phantasmes instead. For going first, you can also just include more hand traps, right? That also works. If your opponents shut you down, you shut them down. One card that I might consider, but at least not for my locals because nobody there plays Lunalight, is to include the Jizukuru back into the deck. I barely saw it at the open as well. It's really the deck where you just run into it ever so often. If you see this card, consider it, still play it, right? I think this would simply be the exchange that I would make. The Druisworm just came in for me instead because there's a lot of Branded players right now at the locals because they enjoy this deck. And of course there's Mitsu, there's Orcrus, right? There's all those decks where Visits are still good at, even Blue Eyes, right? And that's why I include it over the Kaiju, but I think if you play at a bigger event, just include the one Kaiju to be more safe against Lunalight. You can still use Branded Fusion, use Albus and Nibiru to go into a big Titanic Lad that can run over one Lygadance, and then you have to grind a little bit, especially with Pan in the graveyard, and do the same again on the next turn, which you can recur Titanic Lad and Albus from your graveyard with your Athalion, right? And then one card for going first, again, I think it's very powerful in this deck, but we instead chose more ways to fuse, is the Dragon's Mind. So if you play less Not Engine in your main deck, I think you could definitely put this into the side deck to just one-on-one exchange it for the Fuwa. That's what I did at the open. Won me one of my Melis matchups, so that was very good. It's a very reasonable approach, I think, in the side. Those, I think, are some other good options. Phantasme, Fenrir, and Dragon's Mind are very good, and you should probably play one card, right? That's it for the side. Let's talk about the quick play spell now. Alright, let's talk about the applications of the new quick play spell, the Fallen and the Virtous. And I had this situation coming up at my last locals as well, where you will often see situations like this, where you'll play a hand like this, and you'll start with normal summon Lucia's effect, grabs as a 5 mana, we then go on rest with priority, use 5 mana effect, fuse some of our cards from hand, right? And let's say the Lucius here because we want more sets, go for an Athalion, I could just pick one from the top, oops, and then we'll go Athalion 1 targeting 2 of our cards, which would then be, let's say, 5 mana and Pan as our targets, and then we'll go Chainlink 1 Athalion, Chainlink 2 Pan, Chainlink 3 Lucius, right? And what our opponent often will do, if they have access to it, is use Imperm or Vela on the Athalion, right? And then there's quite a lot of neat things you could do, because you can just chain Quick Play Spell, send an Albion for cost, target your own Athalion, destroy it, they will not negate it, right? And then you chain Resolves, where you will set, let's say, Rahu Ketsu, and add these 2 back to your hand. And all of a sudden you have a very neat setup, because you can now, let's say we'll just go Ketsu effect, grab ourselves a copy of the Urgula, and then use Rahu effect, fuse, I don't know, let's say a Frixel with the Urgula in hand to go, or even we could potentially even say 5 mana if we want all 3 traps to go into the Gulmo, and then we'll set Chainlink 1, Urgula, Frixel, 5 mana as Chainlink 1 to 3, set ourselves all 3 of our traps, right? And then all of a sudden we have a pretty much full end board. Of course, the Athalion is already in graveyard, but that doesn't really matter. Then we'll let opponent cut, activate Urgula, target 5 mana, put him under the deck, add her back to hand, right? This could be a turn, even though you should have played it more ideally to maybe keep Urgula access. But that's not the point right now. We'll then go to our NVA FAs, and of course our brand players will know we can then trigger the Albion, and We only have 2 targets on our deck right now. We could potentially add or set a Branded Fusion, which that doesn't do anything, but we can set another Fallen and the Virtuous, right? Which all of a sudden we have a labyrinth-esque setup where we have 3 traps and then also the Fallen and the Virtuous, and all of a sudden our end board looks very powerful because we have a pop, we have a way to fuse. In this situation we would have Pan, another hand trap, and 4 cards in our back row. And what you can do now, if your opponent, for example, plays a card that you want to destroy, you'll activate Fallen and the Virtuous and you will send Titanic at full cost. And this is of course what you do if you don't have access to Branded Fusion, right? That's important. You destroy your card, you play your turn, activate your traps, right? Draw a card, whatever. But that's not the point right now. In the end phase, what you will then do, because your opponent played into your board, maybe they're halfway out of it, but they don't have the great setup because you just had a lot of resources, right? You will then trigger the Titanic light. And what you can do now depends on the matchup, on how their board looks like, but what you will then do is you won't add the Albus, you will summon it. And of course, Albus effect on summon will discard a card, and now you can fuse. And all of a sudden, you have a whole lot of good targets, which normally would attempt at least to go into Mirror Jade, right? But what we can do a lot against a lot of other decks in the format right now is we go into the Dragon that devours the Dogma. Fuse away 2 of their monsters. We need Albus from our side, a light or dark monster on their side of the field, and just another effect monster. So if we, for example, have a Yummy setup, right, where they have 2 monsters, just fuse them away. If it's against Mitsu, against whatever pretty much that plays light or darks, we can just use the Albus, fuse 2 of their monsters away, and then even use its effect to shuffle back either our own materials or their cards, right? So that is quite neat. That makes this card so powerful. There's other targets you could play as well. For example, you could send Albulinatus to search a Branded Fusion in the end phase. Though I would prefer just playing a second Albion for that purpose, right? But I think these are very neat interactions where you can play through interruptions because of the quick play spell. You can play better into boards because of the quick play spell, because all of a sudden we have out to the Herald in the main deck that isn't just we need to draw Nibiru. Now we have 3 Nibirus that we can use once the Herald is on the board, but we also have 3 of the quick play spells. So we now have 6 ways to interact with that card right away. If we include Fuva, we have 9 important draws to get and out to that card, which all of a sudden really increases our percentages, our chances of getting an out to the Herald without being like normal summon Malulu effect, right? Then they have an Emperor and we lose anyways. So that's, I think, one of the cute things you can do. And there will come up a lot of other scenarios where you, for example, already have Branded Fusion access, and all of a sudden you will just set up, let's say, the Sanctifier, and they out it for whatever reason. You can use the quick play spell to then just send the Rindbrom, right? Get access to an Albus Fuse on their turn as well. There's a lot of ways where you can make this work, but a lot of it is also quite situational. What I will also show you now is a 1-card Branded Fusion combo to get access to the quick play spell and also get into the Dracotail engine. The last thing to show off before we wrap things up is how we can utilize Branded Fusion. Let's say we have 4 unplayable cards and then, be it hand traps, 1 or 2 of the traps, right? And all we have is Branded Fusion. What we'll do here is we'll activate Branded Fusion and send, of course, our copy of Albus, but also with Frixel. Usually we would go into the Sanctifier, but what we can also do if we want to change things up a little bit is go into the Albion, the Branded Dragon. Don't use its effect, we'll just trigger the Frixel, which will set us a copy of Katu. We'll then activate the Katu to search ourselves a copy of Dracotail Lucius. We will then proceed to normal summon the Lucius, using its effect to grab a copy of Dracotail 5 mana. Then on resolution, we'll use the 5 mana effect, fusing away Lucius and Albion into a copy of Secretarian Dragon. Lucius then triggers, setting us a copy of Rahu. We can now use the Secretarian effect, targeting Albus and Frixel, to special summon back the Frixel, and Albus goes back into our deck. We can then use the Frixel effect, because we haven't used its on summon effect yet, to special summon back the 5 mana and bounce back the 5 mana. We can then use Rahu, using Urgula and 5 mana from hand, to special summon our copy of Athalion. We can now go Chainlink 1 Athalion, targeting, for example, our Lucius, Chainlink 2 5 mana, Chainlink 3 Urgula. 5 mana and Urgula will now set us 2 of our traps. Here, I think Flame and Sting usually are the most impactful ones, even though that still always depends on the matchup, of course. And we now have a Lucius back in hand. We can then use the effect of Urgula targeting 5 mana. 5 mana goes back to our hand. Urgula goes under our deck. Then we will proceed to the end phase, and Branded players know we use the Albion effect. And here, of course, Branded Fusion could be a target, but doesn't make much sense because we can't fuse anymore with it because we're in the end phase. So what we'll do instead is set a copy of the Fallen and the Virtuous. And what we have now is not just the Sanctifier setup, because then we would just have the Albas, right? Because we couldn't fuse it away with the Frixel Surge. That always works still if you have access to other Dracotail cards, or maybe you already drew the Quick Play spell as a hard draw, right? But if you want this setup, this is a nice version as well, where just off of one Branded Fusion, you get double trap setup, one Quick Play spell to pop, which on the opponent's turn will send a copy of the Titanic Clap because our Albas is back into our deck, right? And a way to fuse with 5 mana, you could fuse, for example, Frixel and Lucius into a Guillermo, where Frixel and Lucius would trigger to set cards, and our Guillermo could pop something. Also, Secretarian against some matchups, usually, as said before, against Dracotail and Branded is not as impactful as we would wish for, but sometimes it's good, right? If they don't have an out to it, a good out to it can still be obnoxious to them. Especially since we have a spell negate for their own Fallen The Virtous, so that could be good. That is all you can achieve just off of one Branded Fusion. We have 2 potential draws with the traps, a way to fuse in the end phase by summoning our Albas with the Titanic Clad, right? And of course, 4 additional cards in hand. We never got rid of those, right? Those could be 4 impactful hand traps, so that's quite neat. So that's something you can do with the Quick Play spell, and then of course in the end phase, Titanic Clad would summon the Albas, use one of our discards, and then fuse with Albas and one of their monsters. And of course, depending on what is on the board, we would go into the Dragon that Devours the Dogma, a Lubellion, a Mirror Jade, something like that. And the Lubellion, for example, could go into the Chaos, right? Shuffling itself on the Albas back. There's a lot of potential plays you can do with that, just off of this one card by it being included into our deck. And I think that is quite neat. So let's wrap things up. All right, everybody, we're already at the end of the video again. And just like the few prior deck profiles, this has been a longer video again. Simply because I like to talk about some of those intricate interactions, some of those combos you can do with these decks rather than just showing the deck profile, which doesn't tell you really how to play the deck, right? You see the cards, okay. You can, of course, figure it out by yourself, but I think it's much more valuable to teach those things, right? To talk about those things. And we've only just scratched the surface because, of course, there's a lot of interactions which I didn't talk about, right? For example, the Rindbrum setup. This can come up quite nicely. We didn't talk about the Dragon that Devours the Dogma. If you send this with the Quick Play spell, for example, if you already went through your Albion and you haven't recurred it yet, you can search with this, the Quick Play spell as well, because it searches a Star Brigade card, but also Dogmatica card, which, of course, the Quick Play spell is also always a Dogmatica card. We haven't talked about Chaos, which is very good to go into with, you start with Branded Fusion, go Albas and Frixel, go into Albion, and all of a sudden you fuse into the Chaos Dragon, right? You don't even need to use your Albas from grave. Or you fuse into Lubellion and then use Lubellion effect, shuffling back itself and Albas to go into Chaos, right? There's a lot of neat interactions you can do with this card where it blows apart the board of your opponent, especially if you're in the Dracotail mirror match, right? Branded Dracotail mirror match, that is. That, I think, is very impactful, even in the regular Dracotail mirror match. There's still some other things I haven't talked about. For example, against Lunalight, we talked about the Jizukiru as an out, but in the prior deck profile, I talked about Dragoon, which you can use especially well if you play the King of the Swamp package. But we can use this as well. You can just play one Dark Magician in this deck, or maybe put the Dragoon in your extra deck and put the Dark Magician in the side deck for Lunalight. Because if you're going first and you can set up a Dragoon, which you can do very easily if you have access to Branded Fusion, right? Because you can just send the Dark Magician, fuse into a Dragoon, and if they don't have something like Droplet, they don't win the duel, right? And you can out Droplet potentially with a Dracotail Flame if they don't set a trap, right? There's even ways to play around it. Where the Dragoon just needs one negate, it's bigger than the Ligadance, it can't be destroyed by card effects, can't be targeted. It's against some decks, it's a towers and a really just good way to win the duel, right? And that is a little package that I saw in one regional deck list that I really thought was funny, because it reminds me of the old ways where people were playing Dragoon with Dark Magician and Branded, where you would just send it with Branded Fusion, go into Lubellion, for example, against decks like Pearly, where this was all of a sudden a really powerful card against that deck, right? So there's a lot of ways where you can still build this deck and explore this deck, which I was thinking with the prior list, this deck is kind of solved, but it is not. There's a lot of opportunities to build and grow this deck, and that's what I think is very exciting about Dracotail still. So, as always, thank you so much for watching the video. A big thank you for the last video where I had a lot of interactions, a lot of discussions in the comment section as well. I really enjoyed that. Keep that going. I think that's super cool. And thank you again. Have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.